It was a humid summer night, the air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine wafting through the open windows. The moonlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting silvery patterns on the wooden floor of the bedroom. Julia lay in bed, tossing and turning, her thoughts a whirlwind of unease. Daniel, her husband, had been coming home late more often than usual. His excuses felt flimsy, his explanations vague. Tonight, he hadn't even bothered to text her. She glanced at the clock, 11:45 p.m. Her heart tightened with an instinctual dread she couldn't shake. She picked up her phone, staring at the blank screen, as if willing it to light up with a message from him. The silence, however, was deafening. Her hand trembled slightly as she set the phone back down, a mixture of worry and suspicion gnawing at her. Unable to bear it any longer, Julia got out of bed, slipping into a pair of sandals and throwing on a light sweater over her nightgown. She stepped out of the house, her feet moving almost of their own accord, driven by a force she didn't fully understand. The cool night air brushed against her skin as she walked down the quiet street, the only sound being the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Daniel's office was only a few blocks away, but she didn't head in that direction. Instead, she turned toward the part of town where the lights stayed on late, where bars and restaurants buzzed with life long after the workday ended. Her heart pounded with each step, a part of her hoping she wouldn't find him, another part terrified that she would. As she rounded a corner, her breath caught in her throat. Across the street, just outside a dimly lit bar, she saw him, Daniel. He was leaning against the wall, his arm wrapped around a woman Julia didn't recognize. The woman was laughing, her head tilted back, her hand resting on his chest, in a way that was far too intimate for Julia's comfort. For a moment, Julia froze, her mind reeling. It felt as if the ground had opened up beneath her, threatening to swallow her whole. She wanted to look away, to turn around and go home, but something inside her wouldn't let her move. She was rooted to the spot, her eyes locked on the scene unfolding before her. The woman leaned in closer to Daniel, her lips brushing against his ear as she whispered something. Whatever it was, it made him smile. That same smile Julia had once fallen in love with. The sight of it now, directed at someone else, sent a jagged pain through her heart. Julia took a deep breath, summoning the strength to confront them. She crossed the street, each step heavy with the weight of her shattered trust. As she approached, Daniel finally noticed her. His eyes widened in shock, his body stiffening as if he'd been caught in a lie, which of course he had. "Julia," he stammered, stepping away from the other woman. What are you doing here?" Julia felt a surge of cold fury rise within her, mixing with the hurt that had settled deep in her chest. "I could ask you the same thing," she replied, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to keep it steady. The woman, sensing the tension, glanced between them before giving Daniel a questioning look. "Who is this?" she asked, her tone more annoyed than concerned. "I'm his wife," Julia answered, her eyes never leaving Daniel's face. She watched as the woman's expression shifted from annoyance to surprise, and then to something resembling guilt. The woman took a step back, her hand slipping away from Daniel's arm. "I didn't know," she muttered, looking at Daniel with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You said you were single." Julia's heart ached at the confirmation of what she had already feared. The betrayal felt like a physical blow, but she wasn't going to let it break her. Not here, not in front of him. "Julia, please," Daniel started, his voice pleading, but she cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Save it, Daniel," she snapped, her voice rising. "I don't need to hear your excuses. I saw enough." For a moment, the three of them stood in a tense silence. Julia could feel to the woman's discomfort, but it was Daniel's shame that gave her a bitter sense of satisfaction. He had the decency to look ashamed, at least. But it was too little, too late. The woman, sensing there was nothing more to be gained from staying, turned to leave. "I'm sorry," she said quietly to Julia, though Julia wasn't sure if the apology was sincere or simply an attempt to escape the awkward situation. Julia didn't respond, her eyes fixed on Daniel, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere but there. The woman walked away quickly, her heels clicking on the pavement, leaving Julia and Daniel alone in the uncomfortable silence. "I don't know what to say," Daniel finally murmured, his voice heavy with regret. He took a tentative step towards her, but she held up her hand, stopping him in his tracks. "There's nothing you can say, Daniel," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The hurt in her chest was overwhelming, but she fought to keep her composure. "I loved you, I trusted you, and this is what you do?" He had no answer, only the silence that hung between them like a shroud. The weight of what he had done seemed to settle on his shoulders, and he looked down at the ground, unable to meet her gaze. Julia felt the tears welling up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't cry here, not in front of him, not when he didn't deserve her tears. "I'm going home," she said finally, her voice cracking just a little. "You can stay here. Do whatever you want. I'm done." She turned on her heel, not waiting for a response, and walked away. Her heart was heavy, her mind spinning, but there was a strange sense of clarity within the pain. This was the end of something, but maybe, just maybe, it was also the beginning of something new. As she walked home, the first light of dawn broke on the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. It was a new day, and with it came the promise of a fresh start, a life without the lies, without the deceit. A life she would rebuild piece by piece on her own terms.